My name is Callista Rowan, and this is the story of how my blood turned on me, how greed hollowed out the meaning of family, and how, against everything they stripped from me, I still found a way to rise. I was born and raised on a piece of land that smelled of juniper, dust, and home. Rowan Hill, they called it. 112 acres tucked into the rolling outskirts of Auburn, California, with golden fields that danced in the wind and a two-story farmhouse my grandfather built by hand in 1953. It wasn't flashy or grand, but it was ours. And until the day my father passed, I believed it always would be. I remember the funeral like a fever dream. The sky was too blue, too cheerful for mourning. People cried in clumps, whispering condolences like apologies, but I barely heard them. I stood at the edge of the plot while they lowered my father into the earth beside my mother, and all I could feel was the sheer weight of silence. After the ceremony, we gathered at the house. My siblings, half-siblings really, milled about like vultures. Gerald, the oldest, pretended to be too grief-stricken to speak, while his wife, Kendra, scoped out the furniture like she was mentally listing prices. Meredith, the youngest, couldn't meet my eyes. And then there was Thomas, my brother by blood, by history, and by distance. He stood by the back porch with a flask in his hand and a look I couldn't name. Not quite guilt, not quite comfort. We didn't talk much that day. None of us really did. But I caught them in glances and half-finished whispers, quiet calculations hidden behind polite smiles. The will was supposed to be simple. My father had told me so himself only weeks before he collapsed in the North Pasture. The land, he said, would go to me. Not because I was his favorite, but because I stayed. I was the one who worked beside him every summer, learned the names of every tree and the rhythm of the soil. My siblings had lives elsewhere. Law firms in Seattle, social circles in San Francisco, condo renovations in Manhattan. But I stayed. So when the lawyer opened the envelope and read the words aloud in the stuffy office of Simmons and Clark, my heart stuttered. Rowan Hill shall be divided equally among the 4 surviving children of Samuel Rowan. My hands went cold. The air thinned. I stared at the paper, then at the lawyer, then at Gerald's smirk. "That can't be right," I said, my voice cracking. "Dad told me. He said the land would be mine." Gerald leaned forward. "People say a lot of things, Callista. What matters is what's in writing." "He wouldn't have changed it," I insisted. "I saw the draft. This isn't what he wanted." The lawyer cleared his throat. "This version was signed and notarized 2 weeks before your father's passing." 2 weeks. That was when I was out of town, helping a friend with a medical emergency. The only time in years I'd left Rowan Hill for more than a day. Meredith wouldn't meet my gaze. Thomas just closed his eyes. I left the office shaking. Over the next few weeks, I tried to fight it. I begged, I pleaded, I tried reason, memory, even guilt. But nothing swayed them. Gerald had already contacted a buyer, some corporate developer, who wanted to turn the land into a resort spa. The irony made me nauseous. Rowan Hill, carved into pieces, for jacuzzis and parking lots. I stayed at a friend's house in town, too stunned to sleep. I stopped going to the farmer's market. I couldn't bear the questions or the pity. What could I say? That my own siblings had sold my inheritance out from under me? That I had nothing left but the memories of what once was? And then, on the 3rd night of sleepless grief, I remembered something. A conversation. Years ago. I had been 19, frustrated after a long day mending fences, when I burst into the kitchen and told my father I wanted to leave, that I didn't want to waste my youth digging post holes and weeding rows. He didn't yell, he didn't scold. He just poured 2 glasses of lemonade, slid one to me, and said, "There's more to this land than meets the eye. Someday you'll see." When I asked what he meant, he only smiled. Some things are meant to stay hidden until the time is right. Back then, I rolled my eyes. Now, I wasn't so sure. I drove back to the farm at dawn. The sale hadn't closed yet. I still had access until the papers finalized. I parked by the barn, heart thudding, and stepped into the house for what I thought might be my last time. It smelled like dust and pine. The floors creaked under my boots. Everything felt frozen in amber, like time had paused just to mourn with me. I started in the study. My father kept records meticulously, ledgers, tax slips, letters, nothing out of place. But I remembered that he didn't trust banks, didn't believe in safe deposit boxes. If you can't reach it when the lights go out, you don't own it. Thomas stood on the front porch of the farmhouse, the wood groaning under his boots. But his presence made a different kind of pressure, a slow-building storm cloud kind. His eyes weren't angry, but they weren't friendly either. The way he looked at me reminded me of someone who'd seen something he wished he hadn't, and now he had to carry the weight of it into someone else's storm. "I didn't know you'd come," I said, keeping my tone even. My hands were still shaking from the adrenaline crash. Filing the deed, running across town to the clerk's office, slamming the brakes on my siblings' betrayal, it had all caught up to me now. But I wasn't going to show weakness, not in front of him. He didn't speak at first, just looked past me into the house, like he half expected to see our father walking down the stairs with that old smirk of his, chewing sunflower seeds like nothing could touch him. Finally, he said, "Dad told you, didn't he? About the deed." I narrowed my eyes. "He did, and I found it. So what now, Thomas? You gonna call Gerald? Let him know I'm still here, still fighting?" Thomas rubbed his jaw, his stubble catching the sun like steel shavings. "You think this is just about land, Callista, but it's bigger than that. You don't know half of what you stepped into." I stepped onto the porch with him, shutting the door behind me. "Then why don't you enlighten me? Because from where I stand, all I see is my siblings trying to erase me and our father's last wish." He sighed, looking out over the fields. The light was golden, soft, the kind that makes even a dying world look like it's blooming. "There's an old debt, one Dad made, years ago, before you were old enough to know what he was doing." "Debt?" "Not the kind you pay with checks, the kind that follows bloodlines. The kind that buries itself in land titles and handshake promises and never really dies." My mouth went dry. "What are you talking about, Thomas?" He turned to me then. "There was a man, real estate speculator named Lennox Cade. He came through town over 20 years ago, promised Dad he could help keep the ranch afloat during the drought years if Dad signed over a conditional deed. Something quiet, something no one would notice unless things went bad." "What kind of deed?" "It was an easement agreement buried in legalese. It gave Lennox first rights to purchase in case of death or sale. But there was more to it than that. Dad found out too late. Cade slipped in a clause that gave him claim to any mineral rights under the land. Oil, gas, gold. If any of it was found, it'd be Cade's." My mouth dried. "What are you talking about, Thomas?" He turned to me then. "There was a man, real estate speculator named Lennox Cade. He came through town over 20 years ago, promised Dad he could help keep the ranch afloat during the drought years if Dad signed over a conditional deed. Something quiet, something no one would notice unless things went bad." "What kind of deed?" "It was an easement agreement buried in legalese. It gave Lennox first rights to purchase in case of death or sale. But there was more to it than that. Dad found out too late. Cade slipped in a clause that gave him claim to any mineral rights under the land. Oil, gas, gold. If any of it was found, it'd be Cade's." I felt like the porch was tilting beneath me. "But I filed the deed Dad left me," I said. "That should override anything else, right?" Thomas shook his head. "Not necessarily. Not if the easement was registered first and never revoked." The legal clerk hadn't mentioned it. But then again, I hadn't asked, and I hadn't known to. So why now? Why the rush to sell? Thomas's voice dropped lower. "Because Cade's dead, but his son isn't. Lennox Jr. came back last month, quiet, slick, and already sniffing around City Hall. Gerald and Meredith, they've been meeting with him." The betrayal clawed through me anew.
You're telling me they were willing to sell the land, our family's land, just to get in bed with a vulture like that? Worse, said Thomas. They promised him the land before Dad even passed. They knew about the mineral surveys. There's something under Rowan Hill, something valuable. My stomach twisted. So I've inherited a war? Exactly. And those papers you filed, they bought you time, but they won't stop what's coming. I stared out across the field, where the wind was stirring the dry grass like whispers in a chapel. Rowan Hill wasn't just land. It was memory, legacy, blood soaked deep into the soil, and now it was battlefield. If there's something under this land, I said slowly, I need to know what it is, and fast. Thomas hesitated. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded map. Dad had this hidden in the cellar, found it after the funeral. It's a geological survey from 1998. I opened it slowly. The paper was brittle, but the markings were clear. There, beneath the southern ridge, was a red X, and next to it, confirmed vein specimen samples stored off-site. My breath caught. Gold? Thomas nodded. Not just any. High-grade quartz vein. Could be worth millions. But if Lennox Jr. proves it existed when his father held the easement, he could claim rights. Unless I prove the deed Dad left me invalidates that easement. Exactly. But proving that means finding every copy of that agreement, and they won't make it easy. I folded the map, my hands steady now. If there's something under this land, I said slowly, I need to know what it is, and fast. Thomas hesitated. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded map. Dad had this hidden in the cellar, found it after the funeral. It's a geological survey from 1998. I opened it slowly. The paper was brittle, but the markings were clear. There, beneath the southern ridge, was a red X, and next to it, confirmed vein specimen samples stored off-site. My breath caught. Gold? Thomas nodded. Not just any. High-grade quartz vein. Could be worth millions. But if Lennox Jr. proves it existed when his father held the easement, he could claim rights. Unless I prove the deed Dad left me invalidates that easement. Exactly. But proving that means finding every copy of that agreement, and they won't make it easy. I folded the map, my hands steady now. If there's something under this land, I said slowly, I need to know what it is, and fast. Thomas hesitated. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded map. Dad had this hidden in the cellar, found it after the funeral. It's a geological survey from 1998. I opened it slowly. The paper was brittle, but the markings were clear. There, beneath the southern ridge, was a red X, and next to it, confirmed vein specimen samples stored off-site. My breath caught. Gold? Thomas nodded. Not just any. High-grade quartz vein. Could be worth millions. But if Lennox Jr. proves it existed when his father held the easement, he could claim rights. Unless I prove the deed Dad left me invalidates that easement. Exactly. But proving that means finding every copy of that agreement, and they won't make it easy. I folded the map, my hands steady now. If there's something under this land, I said slowly, I need to know what it is, and fast. Thomas looked at me for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. You've got more of Dad in you than they ever did. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the study poring over every folder, every drawer, every slip of yellowing paper my father left behind. I built a timeline, phone records, receipts, legal consultations, and in a rusted filing cabinet beneath old tax forms, I found it. A handwritten letter, addressed to me. If you're reading this, Callie, it means things went sideways. I tried to fix it, but some problems take root too deep to pull out without bleeding. Cade tricked me. I signed out of desperation, but I never trusted him, so I wrote up that transfer deed in secret. It won't fix everything, but it might buy you a chance. Keep this land, Callie. It's more than soil. It's truth. And one day, that truth might save you. My throat closed around the words. For the first time since the funeral, I cried. The next morning, I drove into Auburn and met with a land rights attorney named Elaine Ford. 40 years in the business, sharp eyes, sharper mind. She read the deed, the letter, the survey map, then leaned back in her chair. You've got a strong claim, she said, but it's going to be a fight. If Cade's easement was properly registered and unrevoked, it's a ticking bomb. We need to find every version of that agreement, and more importantly, we need to find the mineral samples your dad mentioned. Why? Because if they're stored off-site and dated, we can prove when he discovered the vein. If the date is after he revoked Cade's influence, or better yet, if Cade never had access to that data, we can break the easement claim. I nodded slowly. So where do we look? Elaine tapped the map. Your father...
I stepped between Lennox Jr. and the cabin door like a reflex. No thinking, just fire in my chest. You take one more step, and I'll have the sheriff haul you off this mountain. He smiled, but his eyes were cold, calculating. You think the sheriff will risk that kind of lawsuit? You're on shaky ground, Miss Rowan, and I don't mean just the legal kind. He turned his gaze to the horizon, where the ridge dropped off into valleys threaded with pine. Then he looked at Thomas. I thought you were smarter than this. Thomas didn't answer. He just stepped closer to me. Not behind, beside. That seemed to bother Lennox more than my threat. Gerald broke the silence next. What's in the box? He asked, pointing with his chin toward the crate still resting on the porch. You know we have a right to see it, as part of the family. I didn't look at him. You lost that right when you sold your soul for a cash offer and a handshake. Meredith shifted awkwardly behind them, her eyes flicking toward the ground. She wouldn't meet my gaze, not even now. I want you off this land, I said to all of them. Now. Lennox's eyes narrowed. You think you've won, but you're just playing the first hand. There's a process coming, a long one. Court filings, depositions, and when it's over, you'll wish you'd just taken the buyout. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The weight of the box at my feet did all the talking. He finally turned. This isn't over. And they left. That night, I didn't sleep. Again. Elaine Ford called first thing in the morning. I told her what we found. I brought her the samples, the notebook, and the survey map. She looked over every inch, then glanced up at me with something between admiration and warning. These assay results, she said, tapping a vial with her pen, are a game changer. If they hold up in court, they'll crush Cade's claim. But we need an independent geologist to verify them, preferably someone with no ties to the county. I asked her to find someone. She promised she would. While she worked on that, I buried myself in the attic, searching for anything else my father might have hidden. I didn't eat much, barely drank. I was fueled by fear, fury, and grit. 3 days later, Elaine called again. She said, I found someone. Professor Leland Argo, University of Nevada. Retired, but still consults. He's expensive. I'll pay. I already sent him the data. He's driving in tomorrow. But listen, he wants to examine the ridge itself. That could be dangerous. Lennox might have eyes on that area. You sure you want to do this? I didn't even hesitate. Yes. The next morning, Professor Argo arrived in an old tan Bronco with more dust than paint. He was in his late 60s, built like a former lumberjack, and wore a hat that hadn't seen a city in decades. He shook my hand firmly. You Callista? I nodded.
This is my brother Thomas. He nodded to Thomas. Let's get to it. We drove back to the ridge with Thomas in the back, watching the road behind us like a hawk. When we arrived, Argo unloaded his gear. Ground-penetrating radar, a portable drill, a scanner I didn't know the name of. He got to work without small talk. As the sun climbed higher, he pointed at a patch of earth near the X marked on Dad's map. It's still here, the vein. Rich, too. Not easy to access without major equipment, but it's untouched. I felt something in my chest relax for the first time in weeks. Then we heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. Not again! 2 black SUVs this time. One parked near the trailhead, the other pulled up slow behind us. Elaine stepped out of the passenger side of the second vehicle. She wasn't alone. With her was a man in a dark gray suit and a woman with a state-sealed badge. Elaine spoke first. I had to call in backup. Lennox's lawyer just filed an emergency motion claiming unlawful possession of geological data. He's trying to argue that the mineral samples are stolen property. I blinked. Stolen? From where? The land. He's saying you accessed property still under legal dispute and removed evidence without consent. I looked at Argo. We're not doing anything illegal. Elaine raised a hand. I know, but we need to cover every step now. The woman with me is from the State Land Use Board. She's here to oversee the survey and confirm chain of custody. I called her in before Lennox could block us. Argo grunted. Smart. The state official, whose name was Marlene, watched everything with professional detachment. She made notes, took pictures, recorded the coordinates of each site. Just keep everything documented, she said, and I suggest moving the samples into a secured location until court makes a ruling. Thomas nodded. We've got a lockbox at the lawyer's office. Nobody touches it unless subpoenaed. Marlene approved. Good. Then we're done here for today. We packed up the gear. As Argo secured the last of his instruments, he leaned into me. I've seen land fights like this before. They always get ugly. But you've got something the others don't. What's that? History. It doesn't show up in court dockets, but it speaks louder than lawyers. I didn't know if he meant it as encouragement or a warning. The next few days were a whirlwind. Argo's formal report arrived, 200 pages of data, assay results, and professional conclusions. Elaine submitted it to the court immediately. That's when things escalated. Gerald filed a restraining order against me, claiming I'd threatened him with a shovel. Meredith went on a podcast, accusing me of forging the deed. And Lennox Jr., he filed a separate civil suit claiming emotional damages and slander. Elaine stayed cool through it all. She said, "It's all noise. They're trying to bury you in paperwork. Keep your head down. Let the evidence speak." But it wasn't easy. My name was being dragged through every back alley in town. Old friends crossed the street to avoid me. Local businesses stopped taking my calls. I was becoming a ghost in my own hometown. That's when Thomas did something I didn't expect. He held a press conference at the town square with reporters, cameras, microphones. He stood at the podium and told the whole damn story. About our father, about the easement, about Lennox Cade's deception, and about me. He looked right into the camera and said, "My sister Callista was the only one who stayed. She worked that land while the rest of us ran off chasing other things. She was the one Dad trusted, and she's the one I trust now. If anyone deserves to keep Rowan Hill, it's her." It was the first time I cried in public. The next day, I received an envelope at the door. No return address. Inside, a single page. Typed. No signature. I know what your father hid in the west pasture. You'd be wise not to dig there. Some secrets are buried for a reason." I read it twice, then I picked up the keys to the tractor shed. Because I wasn't going to be warned off my own land. Not now. Not ever.
I didn't tell Thomas about the letter. Not yet. I didn't show it to Elaine either. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I didn't want to add fuel to a fire already roaring too hot. Or maybe deep down, I needed to face whatever waited in that pasture on my own. Before dawn, I loaded the ATV with a shovel, gloves, a metal detector, and 2 flares, just in case. The west pasture stretched far past the main grazing area, dipping into a slope the cattle used to avoid. It always stayed damp, even in the summer. My father used to say it was the land's way of hiding its secrets. The sky was still purple-gray when I reached the ridge. The trees whispered low warnings. Even the birds were quieter here. I parked near the old sycamore tree, the one with a scar across its bark that looked like a sideways V. That tree had always felt out of place, too wide, too still. I started with the metal detector. It chirped at every buried fence post and lost horseshoe, but then it whined sharp and long near the base of the tree. I marked the spot, took a breath, and started digging. The ground fought me, damp, heavy, root-packed. But I kept going until the shovel hit something solid. Metal, maybe, but not a box. Flat. Broad. I cleared away more dirt. It was a hatch. Rust-bitten, bolted into a concrete frame. Something no one would have built unless they meant to keep whatever was inside completely hidden. I stared at it, my heart drumming against my ribs. Then I crouched and reached for the handle. It groaned as it gave way. The smell that escaped wasn't rot. It was cold, dry, stale air sealed for decades. A wooden ladder descended into darkness. I clipped on my flashlight, lowered myself 1 rung at a time. The shaft was about 12 feet deep. At the bottom, a narrow corridor opened, carved into the earth, reinforced with beams, shelved with crates, filing cabinets, and 1 old steel desk at the far end. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a bunker. I walked slowly, light sweeping over yellowing papers, stacks of maps, sealed glass cylinders, and, on the desk, a leather-bound ledger. I opened it. Handwriting. My father's. But not just his. Page after page bore another signature, too. Lennox Cade. Dates ranging from 1995 to 2006. Notes about land assessments, resource evaluations, names of people I didn't recognize, payments listed beside them. What is this? I flipped deeper. That's when I saw it. An envelope paper-clipped to the page dated March 3rd, 2001. Inside, a faded photograph of my father and Lennox Sr. and someone else, a woman, wearing a sheriff's badge. They were standing beside a large slab of excavated earth. The caption on the back read, "Phase 2 begins. Access cleared." My stomach turned. I kept reading. The ledger laid out plans, not just for mining, but for something else. Disposal. Barrels, codes, hazard symbols. Toxic waste. The West Pasture wasn't just rich with gold. It had been used, at least in part, as a dumping ground. Illegal. Buried. Hidden beneath false signatures and falsified inspection reports. No wonder Dad sealed it. No wonder someone warned me not to dig. I staggered back from the desk, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was about liability, criminal charges, environmental disaster. And if this came to light now, it wouldn't just bury Cade Jr. It could bury me, too.
because legally that land was mine now. I climbed out of the hatch, resealed it, and sat beneath the sycamore until my breathing slowed. I drove back in silence. Thomas was waiting at the porch. "You okay?" I looked him dead in the eye. "We have a problem." Inside, I laid it out, every word, every discovery. His face changed with each detail. Shock, then disbelief, then something harder. Protective. He ran his hair through his head. "So that's why Dad hid the West pasture from all of us." "I think he felt trapped," I said quietly. "He made a deal to save the land, then realized too late what he allowed. So he shut it down, buried it, hid everything in case it ever came back to haunt us." Thomas sat down heavily, and now it has. We both knew we couldn't keep it secret forever, but going public now, during a lawsuit, would be suicide. Elaine had to know. When I showed her the photo and ledger, she didn't blink. "This changes everything," she said. "But not necessarily in the way you think." She pulled out her laptop. "If we can prove the toxic waste was dumped under Cade's watch and that your father tried to stop it, it shifts the liability back to them, especially if Cade Jr. tries to claim mural rights here. That would tie him directly to the mess." My heart thudded. "But what if they spin it? Say I'm hiding evidence?" Elaine looked me straight in the eyes. "Then we hit first. We file an injunction to freeze all excavation on the land. Claim environmental risk. It'll scare off investors, force Cade's hand." So we did. Within 48 hours, the court approved the emergency injunction. And that's when the media got wind of it. Local news ran with the headline, "Toxic Legacy, Rowan Ranch under investigation." Reporters camped outside my fence. Helicopters hovered. The town turned. But I didn't flinch, because the truth was finally breathing above ground. Lennox Jr. filed a rebuttal, claiming forgery. His lawyer threatened criminal charges, but Elaine fired back harder, with documents we uncovered from the bunker, land surveys signed by Cade Sr. that clearly marked the barrel locations. And then the real break came. Marlene, the state official, called us into her office. We pulled satellite data from historical archives. There's a heat signature in the pasture from early 2002 consistent with buried drums of industrial waste. Thomas leaned forward. "So it's real." Marlene nodded. "And if they push, we'll file charges of our own. But you need to be ready. Cade won't go quietly." I left the office feeling both lighter and more exposed than I'd ever felt. That night, the mailbox on the main road exploded. Shrapnel embedded in the oak tree beside it. Sheriff's deputies cordoned off the property. It was a warning. But I'd had enough of being warned. I stood under the porch light looking out across the dark hills of Rowanland, and I made a decision. I wasn't just going to defend the truth. I was going to dig it all the way out, no matter what it cost me.
The morning after the explosion, I stood by the blackened stump of the mailbox and stared at the twisted hunk of metal, half melted and embedded in the dirt like a warning shot that hadn't hit its mark. The sheriff's deputy wrapped up his inspection with a tired look in his eyes, the kind you see on people who've lived too long in a small town where loyalty bends depending on who's paying the bills. "We'll write up a report," he said, "but don't expect much. No camera footage, no witnesses, just a busted mailbox and a lot of speculation." I didn't reply. Thomas walked out with 2 mugs of coffee and handed me one. He nodded at the deputy with the kind of tired civility you reserve for people who aren't enemies, but sure as hell aren't allies. "They want us scared," I said, finally breaking the silence. "Then they don't know you," Thomas muttered, and sipped his coffee like it was armor. Inside, the house felt smaller. I could feel the walls listening now, watching, waiting. Elaine showed up just before noon,
She wore sunglasses and her hair in a tight bun, business as usual. But her tone had a new edge. The injunction rattled them more than I expected, she said, dropping a folder on the kitchen table. Which is good, but it also makes them dangerous. She pulled out 3 documents, copies of subpoenas. Cade Jr. was demanding access to all mineral samples, all historical land documents, and full disclosure of the underground chamber. He's trying to drown you in process, she said. If we don't move fast, he'll get a court order to excavate under state supervision, which means he'll bury the truth before it sees daylight. I opened the window for air. The scent of scorched metal still clung to the breeze. So, what's our next move? I asked. Elaine smiled. We go on the offensive. The toxic waste wasn't just dumped, it was transported. And no one does that without a paper trail. She handed me a sheet of lined legal paper, old and yellowed. At the top was a list of companies. Most were crossed out. One was circled. Redmark Transport Solutions. She said, I found this in the back of your father's ledger. Redmark was a third-party hauler in Northern California in the late 90s. Operated under the table deals. Shady as hell. But if we can find a driver, someone who remembers the drop, it could blow Cade's defense apart. That afternoon, Thomas and I drove to the county records office. While Elaine chased Redmark's ghost through legal back channels, we hunted boots on the ground. In a dusty, mostly forgotten hallway lined with filing cabinets and moldy carpet, we found the Department of Transportation archives. A retired clerk named Manny let us dig through trip logs from 1999 to 2003. Redmark? He asked, scratching his beard. Yeah, I remember those guys. Drove old blue Kenworths, no logos, cash deliveries, shady crowd. A chance someone's still around? I asked. Manny thought for a moment. Driver named Hank Purdy used to stop in for coffee across the street. Real quiet guy. Might still live out in Elk Grove. I can give you an address. The drive to Elk Grove was 2 hours of winding roads, dry farmland, and conversations we didn't finish. Thomas kept glancing at the rearview mirror like he expected another SUV to materialize. Hank Purdy lived in a mobile home at the edge of a pecan orchard. His trailer leaned slightly to the left, like it was tired of standing. He opened the door with a shotgun in his hands. Thomas raised both arms. We're not here to sell anything. Just want to talk. About, he asked. Rowan Hill. His eyes narrowed. He lowered the shotgun. 10 minutes later, we were seated in his small kitchen while he poured 3 mismatched mugs of instant coffee. You know what I hauled out there? He asked, finally, voice low. We think so, I said. Toxic waste, in barrels, maybe illegally dumped? Hank let out a slow breath. I didn't know at the time. Thought it was old drilling fluid, sludge, something from a mining op. They paid cash, no receipts, just coordinates and timing. Did you ever see who signed off? Once. He stood, rummaged through a drawer, and returned with an old clipboard, its metal rusted and pitted. A single carbon copy sheet was still attached. Signature at the bottom, L. Cade. Elaine's voice rang in my head. We need a smoking gun. This was it. I want to help, Hank said. Never sat right with me. Not after I saw what they were really burying. I just didn't know who'd listen. You found the right people, I told him. Back at the ranch, Elaine filed a motion to introduce the Redmark delivery log into evidence. It would open Cade to criminal inquiry. She also contacted an environmental law firm from Sacramento to bolster the case. And then, in the middle of all that momentum, Thomas disappeared. He didn't come home, didn't answer his phone, didn't leave a note. His truck was still parked in the barn, his boots by the back door. I searched every field, every ridge, every cabin. Panic wrapped around my chest like a vice. That night, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, a plain white envelope had been taped to the wood. Inside was a single Polaroid. Thomas, tied to a chair, bruised, alive. And a note in thick black marker. Call off the lawyers or he disappears.
I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I called Elaine. She went quiet for a long moment. Then, I know someone. The next day, a woman named Odessa showed up. Former FBI, now private. She wore hiking boots and spoke in clipped sentences. She took the photo, scanned it, ran it through a program I didn't recognize, and said, "The window behind him is frosted but square, industrial, like a bottling plant or storage facility." Within 3 hours, she had narrowed it down to 5 locations within 50 miles that matched the light patterns and structure. We drove to each one, carefully, without flashing lights or fanfare. At the 4th site, a decommissioned fruit cannery, we heard something. A groan. Odessa pulled a tire iron from her coat. We found him in the back, tied up, beaten, but alive. Thomas looked up, one eye swollen shut, and said they wanted leverage. Said if you don't walk away, they'd go after everyone who ever helped you. I kneeled beside him. They underestimated how far I'll go. We got him home, quietly. Elaine contacted the FBI. With Hank's testimony, the red mark logs, and now the attempted kidnapping of a witness, we had enough for federal interest. They opened an investigation, and just like that, Cade Jr. started to crack. He fired his lawyer, held a press conference denying all knowledge, and then vanished from town. But I knew better. This wasn't the end. It was just the storm before the real fight.
I didn't sleep for 2 days after Thomas came home. Even though he was safe now, resting on the pull-out couch with bruises on his face and gauze on his shoulder, I couldn't sit still. I kept replaying that photo in my head. His body slumped, the helplessness in his eyes, the way his silence was used as a threat against me. But I wasn't going to break. Instead, I cleaned every room in the house, top to bottom, like I was preparing the place for a siege. I double-checked the locks, the gates, the cameras Elaine had helped install. I wasn't going to let anyone touch this land again without a fight that left scars. Odessa stayed nearby. She never said where she was sleeping, but I'd see her sometimes near the tree line at dusk, scanning the ridge with binoculars, like some kind of myth. You don't see her until the wind shifts, and then she's gone. But I took comfort in knowing she was there, watching. Meanwhile, Elaine moved fast. The moment Cade vanished, she filed an emergency motion to seize all remaining documents from his company and freeze every active transaction tied to Rowan Hill. Within a week, court-ordered agents raided his downtown office and pulled 3 filing cabinets and 6 hard drives. According to the clerk, some of the paperwork looked like burn copies, legal documents run through incinerators, then doused and rewritten, but a few survived. One of those papers changed everything. Elaine showed it to me over lunch on the back porch. The wind was stiff, cold for summer. It carried the scent of pine sap and something older, like storm water that hadn't fallen yet. This was filed under a dummy corporation called Mirador Resources, but the name listed under authorized signatory? Lennox Cade Jr., she said. She pointed to a section halfway down the page. Pending discovery of viable mineral deposits, Mirador Resources reserves all rights to commercial extraction upon confirmation of subterranean value per Clause D27, contingent on pre-existing easement. I blinked. D27? Elaine noted. It's buried in the Cade easement, a clause no one caught before, not even your father. But this document shows Cade Jr. tried to invoke it, privately, off record. But the clause depends on proving those minerals existed when the easement was active, right? Exactly. And we already proved my father discovered them after the easement expired.
which makes this document an admission of intent to defraud, Elaine said, lips curling at the corners. Now we just need one more thing. What's that? A witness who knew about this clause before Cade vanished, someone who was in on it, willing or not. We both thought the same name at once. Meredith. She hadn't made a public statement since the press conference weeks ago, not since Thomas exposed our siblings' betrayal and the news outlets began treating me like the wronged party instead of the loose cannon. But I knew where to find her. Her Instagram stories told me enough. She was staying at a cabin up near Lake Shasta. Quiet, private, and just remote enough to avoid questions. A place our family used to rent before everything fell apart. I left at dawn. The drive was long, winding, empty. I didn't tell Thomas or Elaine I was going. I needed Meredith to see me alone, not as a plaintiff, not as a headline, but as her sister. When I arrived, the cabin looked smaller than I remembered. The shutters were half closed. The air smelled of cedar and rain. I knocked twice. No answer. I knocked again. Harder. Then the door creaked open. Meredith stood there, barefoot in an oversized flannel, eyes rimmed red like she hadn't slept in days. "Kelly?" she whispered, like she wasn't sure I was real. "Can we talk?" She stepped aside. Inside, the air was thick. Old wood, dust, the stale weight of guilt. She led me to the couch, then sat across from me like she didn't trust herself to get too close. I didn't know what they were doing. Not really. Gerald handled the documents. Cade handled the money. I went along with it. Because you thought I wouldn't fight back? Her lip trembled. Because I didn't think you'd win. I let the silence sit between us like smoke. "I'm not here to gloat," I said eventually, "but I need your help." "With what?" "There's a clause in the easement, D27. Cade tried to activate it behind the scenes. Did you ever see it? Hear them talk about it?" Meredith looked away. "I found a document. Mirador Resources, Cade's shell company. Elaine says if we get corroboration, we can finish this, end it for good." Meredith swallowed. "There was a meeting at the law office in Auburn just before Dad died. Gerald made me come, said I needed to sign off as a family shareholder." "Who was there?" "Gerald, Cade, his lawyer, and the notary." "Do you remember anything they said about mineral rights?" She nodded slowly. "They talked about activation triggers, something about how the land would be forfeited if value was proven, but Gerald didn't seem worried. He said you'd never fight it." I clenched my jaw. "Will you testify?" I asked. Meredith hesitated, then nodded. "I'm tired of carrying this." I drove her back to the ranch that night. Thomas stood on the porch when we arrived. His bruises had faded, but the tension in his eyes hadn't. He didn't speak when Meredith got out of the truck, just nodded once and held the door open. We briefed Elaine the next morning. She filed an emergency motion to submit Meredith's sworn affidavit. It went through. 2 days later, a federal investigator called. They had found Cade. Or at least, they found his accounts. Hundreds of thousands wired through Belize and the Cayman Islands. And then the break we didn't see coming. A storage unit, registered under Mirador Resources, was discovered outside Sacramento. Inside, documents, hard drives, voice recordings. One of those recordings had Cade's voice. "We'll let the siblings cannibalize each other. Once Rowan Hill is liquidated, we activate D27 and move on extraction quietly. The girl, Callie, she's sentimental. She'll never see it coming." Elaine played that clip in court. The judge ordered a full federal audit of Cade's companies. The easement? Revoked. The lawsuit dismissed with prejudice. The land, legally, incontestably, mine. After the ruling, I stood in the south field, under the shadow of the ridge, and let the wind pass through me. This wasn't just a win. It was survival. The land had tried to keep its secrets, but I had unearthed them all. And now, I had to decide what came next.
The ridge never looked taller than it did that morning. I stood at the edge of the southern field with a rolled-up survey map in one hand and the wind tangling through my hair like fingers made of memory. The legal war was over. The judge's ruling was final. The easement revoked. Cade schemes exposed. And Roan Hill? It was mine. But what now? The truth had come at a cost. I could feel it in the silence of the house, in the long shadows of the barn where my father used to lean against the post and talk to me about soil quality and spring rains. I had fought to reclaim what was ours, to defend the land from those who saw it as profit. But now that I'd won, I wasn't sure what victory looked like. Thomas was back on his feet. Literally. He walked slower, favored his left side, but the bruises were fading. He spent most mornings fixing the back fence or sharpening the old tools out of habit, but I could tell even he didn't know how to feel. The town was still quiet toward us. No one came by to offer congratulations, no pies or welcome back casseroles. Some neighbors still saw me as the troublemaker who dragged our family name through the courts. Others didn't know what to believe, but I didn't care anymore. The land knew, and it was time to walk it again. Not as a daughter trying to hold on to the past, but as a woman shaping the future. That day, I brought a small team back to the West pasture. Elaine came with me. So did Odessa, and Hank, the former Redmark driver who had become an unexpected ally. We weren't there to dig. We were there to test. Environmental analysts swept the soil, took samples, ran ground-penetrating radar across the old bunker site. I didn't want to leave anything to chance. The toxins Cade left behind might be buried, but they weren't forgotten. And I wasn't going to risk letting anything fester beneath the surface. I watched from a distance while Odessa stood with her arms crossed, scanning the perimeter like someone still waiting for a sniper shot. She wasn't just watching for Cade anymore. She was watching for what kind of world I was about to walk into. The samples came back 2 days later. Contamination levels were high in the lower basin near the sealed barrels. Not catastrophic, but dangerous enough to warrant cleanup. The analysts gave me 2 options: cap the site permanently, sealing it forever, or excavate it under EPA supervision and fully restore the land. It wasn't even a question. We were going to excavate. The process would be long, expensive, brutal, but it was necessary. I contacted environmental lawyers, filed paperwork with the Department of Toxic Substances Control, and started looking into grants and funding. It was going to take months, maybe years, but I was ready. And then the letter came.
The first sign that they were testing the perimeter came 2 nights after we upgraded security. It started with the floodlight over the east pasture, a brief flicker, like a short in the line, and then total darkness. Odessa was on the porch when it happened, arms folded tight across her chest, eyes never leaving the tree line. She didn't flinch, just turned and walked straight to the utility box behind the barn. When she opened it, the wires had been cleanly cut, snipped by someone who knew how to be quiet. She didn't say anything until she came back inside. "They're getting close," she said. "Testing response time, watching patterns, seeing how fast we react." "They?" Thomas asked from the kitchen. He still had a cane by his side, but was moving more and more without it. "You think this is Cerberus?" Odessa nodded. "Or someone paid by them." Elaine looked up from her laptop. "The federal agent I spoke to said Cerberus rarely acts directly. They outsource, layers between them and the job." I exhaled through my nose, pacing the kitchen. "So what? We just wait for them to get bolder." Odessa's eyes didn't blink. "No, we get ahead of them." She unrolled a map of the property on the kitchen table. It was hand-drawn, annotated in sharp red ink with circles and arrows and numbers. I recognized the handwriting. "Dad's?" Thomas leaned over. "Yeah, he made this in '08. He was thinking about building an irrigation expansion. Changed his mind after the water study." Odessa tapped one of the marked spots, a small outcropping just past the ridge trail. "You ever checked this area?" "Not recently," I said. "It's mostly rock and old scrub. Nothing grows there." She nodded. "Perfect for observation. If they're watching, it's a high point, covered, full view of the ranch house." So we went. Thomas stayed behind with Meredith and the guards. Elaine came with us, mostly because Odessa didn't want anyone else knowing where we were going. It took 20 minutes to hike the slope. The air was brittle, filled with dust and silence. When we crested the ridge, Odessa motioned for us to stop. She crouched low, scanning the brush. Then she pointed. A half-buried food wrapper, a cigarette butt, still warm, and beyond that a slight shimmer of glass. A scope. We moved in slowly. The setup was abandoned, but not by much. A small tarp nest tucked between boulders, crushed grass where someone had been lying prone, a paper map folded open to a satellite print of Rowan Hill, our building circled in red. Elaine picked it up carefully. They know every structure, every route. Odessa took pictures of everything. "We move your base, tonight." "Move it where?" I asked. "The hay barn. Reinforce it. Set decoys in the house. Let them think they're still watching you." We followed her plan. That night, I didn't sleep in my room. I slept on a cot beside a wall of hay bales, tucked beneath motion sensors and a camera that fed directly to Odessa's laptop. It felt wrong, hiding on my own land. But I wasn't afraid. I was waiting. The next strike came 3 nights later. Around 2:13 a.m., the sensors pinged on the north gate. Odessa sat bolt upright from her station in the barn loft. She keyed her walkie. "North fence. 1 figure. Breach attempt. Thomas, confirm location." Thomas replied, groggy but alert. "It's not me." The figure was fast, wearing black, carrying a bag, moving with the quiet purpose of someone trained to vanish. But we were ready. Odessa signaled the guards, flanked the intruder from both sides. It took less than 4 minutes. When they brought him into the barn, he was panting, hands zip-tied, face bruised from where he'd tripped trying to flee. He didn't say a word. Elaine stepped forward. "Call the sheriff?" Odessa shook her head. "No, not yet." She knelt in front of him. "You work for Cerberus?" Still no answer. So she opened the bag. Inside, a USB drive, a pair of bolt cutters, and a printed photo of me. On the back of the photo was a word written in pen. Neutralize. Odessa turned to me, her voice low. "You're not a legal problem anymore. You're a liability." We held him for 45 minutes. Then the sheriff arrived. Deputy Grant, one of the few who hadn't turned cold since the lawsuit. He took one look at the bag and whistled. "We'll take it from here. But I suggest you keep your doors locked and your lights on." "I've got more than lights," I told him. He nodded once. "I believe you." The next day, the agent from the federal task force arrived in person. Agent Kessler, late 40s, weathered, wore a worn leather holster like a man who didn't bother hiding how many times he'd drawn it. He sat at my table and didn't touch the coffee I offered. "You've stirred a hornet's nest," he said. "Cerberus Holdings isn't just a ghost fund. It's a front for 5 shell corps spread across 3 continents. Resource extraction, black site logistics,
political destabilization. We've been tracking them for years. So why haven't you stopped them? Thomas asked. Because until now, no one's lived long enough to testify. That hung in the air like smoke. Agent Kessler pulled out a tablet, opened a satellite feed, zoomed in on Rowan Hill. You're sitting on more than gold, Ms. Rowan. The same vein your father discovered, it runs deeper, far deeper than any surveys revealed, and recent seismic scans suggest it's not just ore. What then? I asked. Rare earth metals, lithium, maybe more. If your land opens up, Cerberus loses leverage in 6 negotiations across the globe. I stared at the screen. Then they're not going to stop. No, they're not. Elaine leaned forward. What do we do? Kessler looked at me. We build a case. You wear a wire. We draw them out, and we take them down from the inside. The room went silent. Thomas swore under his breath. She's not bait. But I was already nodding. If it ends this, really ends this, I'll do it. Kessler didn't smile. It might take time, months, maybe years. I've already waited a lifetime. Odessa placed a small black case on the table, opened it. Inside was a wire kit, light and compact. You sure? I nodded, because I wasn't fighting for land anymore. I was fighting for truth, for legacy, for the right to plant my roots and not have them poisoned by the greed of ghosts. The fight wasn't over, but I was finally ready to end it.
The wire was the size of a thumbprint, thin enough to vanish under the collar of a flannel shirt, the receiver tucked into a pocket sewn behind the lining of my jacket. Odessa showed me how to activate it, just 3 taps on the side. I practiced until the motion was second nature. Elaine recorded my consent in triplicate. Agent Kessler handed me a burner phone and said, "Don't use your real number for anything, ever. From now on, you're not just a landowner, you're evidence." The shift was instant. I was no longer just protecting Rowan Hill. I was bait. We didn't have to wait long. 3 days after I agreed to wear the wire, I received a message. No name, just a number and a time. Friday, 6 p.m. The Broken Lantern Motel off Highway 22. The place was infamous, half condemned, a regular stop for the kind of transactions no one wanted in Dayrite. We knew the message had come from a burner, but Agent Kessler insisted we follow it. So, we did. Odessa wired me up in the barn, her hands steady, her eyes never blinking. You don't push. You don't ask questions. You let them talk. You let them think you're scared. I don't have to pretend, I said. Kessler drove me in an unmarked sedan with tinted windows and a fake out-of-state plate. He dropped me a block away and parked where he had a clear line of sight to the room. Room 7. I knocked twice. The door opened on a chain, then slowly swung wide. The man inside looked like a banker. Crisp collar, shiny shoes, but his eyes were too flat, too sharp. "You're alone?" he asked. I nodded. He gestured me in. The room smelled like bleach and old carpet. He didn't offer a seat. "You understand the stakes?" he asked. I nodded again. "We represent parties with significant interest in preserving the balance of operations connected to Rowan Hill. Your continued activity, specifically your refusal to vacate, presents an obstacle." For the first time in months, Rowan Hill stood still. No helicopters overhead, no drone hums circling the trees, no black SUVs ghosting down the ridge road. The silence wasn't peace, it was pause, like the land itself was waiting to see what came next. But beneath that quiet, there were currents moving. The federal investigation into Cerberus had ignited more than headlines. Congressional hearings were announced, international watchdogs swooped in, tech journalists published deep dives into offshore companies with names like Hollow Doors. And everywhere, my face was pinned to the story.
Whistleblower rancher exposes global shell game. Buried deeds and secret easements, the fight for Rowan Hill. Deep rock resonance, and the woman who said no. It was surreal, overwhelming, and a little cruel. Because while the world watched, I was still here, trying to clean up the wreckage. EPA crews arrived to begin the safe excavation of the toxic waste site. Huge machines rumbled up the hill like metal giants, tearing open earth with surgical precision. I stood beside the field every morning, watching as they unearthed the barrels my father had buried to protect his family from the consequences of his mistake. Some of them had started to leak. The remediation plan stretched into years now, not months. The pasture would never be what it was, but it could still be made safe, livable. And I was committed to seeing that through. Not for profit, not for headlines, but because the land deserved to heal. And so did I. Thomas, now fully recovered, took over day operations with the fencing crew. Meredith surprisingly stayed. She said it was to help with logistics, but I knew better. She was trying to redeem herself, one calendar reminder and supply order at a time. And part of me believes she meant it. Elaine worked tirelessly to protect the legal perimeter. She turned away every media request that didn't come through vetted channels. Odessa stayed too, for a time, though she refused to say if she was there professionally or personally. She and I would walk the ridge some mornings, quiet, sharing coffee from steel mugs. Once I asked her what came next. For them, she said, retreat, regroup, rebrand. They won't vanish, but they'll bleed. You made them bleed. And for me, I asked. She looked at me long and slow. You decide that. But I didn't know what I wanted anymore. Not really. Because one night, sitting on the porch with the moon high over the northern pines, I asked myself a question I hadn't dared before. Who am I if the fight is over? For so long, the war had defined me. I had become the resistance, the guardian, the girl who stood against giants. But with the storm receding, I saw the pieces of myself I'd neglected. The part that still missed my father's slow, gravelly laugh. The part that used to sketch tree lines in the margins of math homework. The part that hadn't let herself dream since the night the will was read. I found that part again in the attic. While searching for old tax records for Elaine, I uncovered a box labeled in my father's handwriting, Callista, Personal. Inside were things I had forgotten. A pressed flower I once gave him on his birthday. A short story I wrote at 11 about a magical dog who chased bad guys off a ranch. A sketchbook filled with drawings I didn't remember sharing. And a sealed envelope. I opened it with trembling hands.
Autumn arrived at Rowan Hill like a slow exhale. The pastures softened from gold to copper, the trees shed their leaves like sighs, and the wind carried a new kind of stillness, one that wasn't empty but earned. Every morning, I woke before the sun, walked the ridgeline, and watched the fog slide across the earth like silk being pulled over something sacred. This land had bled. Now it was healing. But peace, I learned, is not the same as silence. One morning, I found a single envelope nailed to the barn door. Plain. No stamp, no seal. Just my name.
Inside, a page torn from an old legal pad. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. You made it to the surface, but remember, depth hides more than dirt. I read it 3 times, then burned it. Not out of fear, but defiance. I wasn't going to let whispers unsettle what had finally steadied. Still, I told Elaine. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "This might be legacy fallout, someone holding a grudge, but let's not assume anything." She contacted Agent Kessler, who was now working a broader Cerberus-related investigation. He'd already testified in front of a Senate subcommittee about the depth of the shell network, the pattern of land acquisitions, the cover operations. When she told him about the note, he asked only one thing. Was it in cursive? Elaine blinked. Yes, very old-fashioned. He didn't say anything more, just promised to run it through the pattern recognition database. I should have let it go there, but I didn't. Because 2 days later, the orchard dog, Milo, went missing. He never wandered. He knew every inch of Rowan Hill, knew the fence lines, the trails, the boundaries, like he'd drawn them himself. When he didn't return for breakfast, I knew something was wrong. I searched for hours, through bramble, between trees, down the dry creek bed where he liked to nap. Nothing, until nightfall. Thomas found him, tied gently but deliberately to the gate of the South Trail, unharmed, but there was something clipped to his collar. A coin, gold-plated, foreign, unmarked. Elaine examined it under a magnifier. She said, "Custom minted. This isn't currency, it's a token." "For what?" Thomas asked. Elaine didn't answer. I didn't need her to. I had seen that exact coin once before, in a file on Odessa's laptop. It was the calling card of a splinter faction Cerberus used for field operations too violent for deniability. They called themselves the Third Ledger. I told Elaine everything. She didn't flinch, but she moved faster after that. Upgraded all locks, brought in another legal consultant from D.C., hired 2 more security contractors to work night patrol. "You think they'll try again?" I asked her. "No," she said. "I think they're waiting to see if you flinch. This is theater, testing your fear." "Well, I'm not flinching." She smiled faintly. "Good. Then let's raise the curtain." We held a press event 3 days later. Under the banner of the Rowan Hill Trust, we announced a public partnership with 3 conservation groups. The land, already under remediation, would now become the anchor site for a broader regenerative farming program that would teach underserved youth about ecological restoration. The message was clear. Rowan Hill was no longer just a ranch. It was a symbol. It belonged to no one person. It stood for the future. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, applications, letters of support. And then, buried beneath the flood of good, another letter. No return address, no handwriting, just a single sheet of paper. Typed. "Your spotlight is your shield, but the light fades. And when it does, we balance the ledger." I showed it to no one. Not because I was afraid, but because I was tired. Tired of threats, tired of secrets, tired of enemies who only know how to crawl in the dark. So I did something I hadn't done before. I sent an invitation, a public digital letter addressed not to Cerberus, not to the Third Ledger, but to whoever still watched. In it, I wrote, "Come see the land, walk it, witness what you tried to break, then tell me if you still believe it should be buried." I expected silence. Instead, 2 days later, a car arrived. Not black, not armored,
just a weathered old Jeep with a cracked windshield. The woman who stepped out was in her late 60s, gray braid, denim jacket, no fear in her eyes. She said, "I'm not who you think, but I used to work with them, years ago." I didn't speak. She held out a photograph, black and white, faded. My father, standing beside her. She said, "Name's Claudia. He trusted me once, and I think he left something with me meant for you." We walked. Down past the ridge, into the old trail my father rarely used. She pointed to a flat stone. Underneath it, a metal canister. Inside, a thumb drive. Back at the house, we opened it. It contained a single video. My father, filmed in the barn. He said, "I don't know who's watching this, but if it's Callista, then it means things got worse than I planned. This land's got secrets I never meant to keep. I signed a contract once with people who claimed to be saving me, but all they wanted was a way in. I broke it, quietly. But breaking it doesn't erase it. They might come for you. I hope they don't. But if they do, know this. I left you more than a deed. I left you proof of what they buried and who helped them." He held up a folder, marked Phase 0. We searched the barn that night, top to bottom. And in the loft, behind a false beam, Thomas found it. The real ledger. Not the one I had uncovered months ago. The original. Names, dates, transactions, photos, signatures, including one that changed everything. Sheriff Wallace, the man who had investigated the bombing of our mailbox, who dismissed the first threats, who looked me in the eyes and said, "We'll write up a report." I handed the ledger to Elaine. She handed it to Kessler. And the next morning, federal agents arrested Sheriff Wallace at his station. Rowan Hill had no more secrets, just truth. And truth, once unearthed, doesn't go back underground. It grows.
The morning Sheriff Wallace was arrested, the town split clean down the middle. Half watched from behind screen doors and curtained windows, whispering the way people do when their world cracks in a place they thought was solid. The other half stood in the parking lot across from the station, arms folded, silent, some ashamed, some smug, but none surprised. I stayed home. I didn't want to watch him fall. He'd been there my whole life. Hat always too wide, belt always too tight. He used to stop by during branding season just to bum a cup of coffee and talk about weather like it was religion. I used to think he was harmless. Turns out, he'd been the linchpin. Wallace was the inside man. The ledger, contained signed approvals, false inspection reports, unfiled complaints. He'd covered Cerberus's tracks in exchange for off-books payouts and favors no one dared list. Even Kessler looked stunned. He was cleaner than most. That's what makes him dangerous. The federal charges stacked high and fast. Racketeering, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to defraud, aiding and abetting international corporate crime. Elaine said it best. He wasn't just a sheriff. He was their insurance. And now he was gone. But as one ghost was dragged into daylight, another crawled out of the dark. The very next morning, we discovered a new drone on the property. Not hovering, not watching, crushed. Its frame twisted in the brush by the east ravine like it had been dropped or shot down. Odessa examined it in silence, then flipped the casing over. "No serial number," she said. "This isn't military grade. It's bespoke." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means whoever sent it isn't watching anymore. They're mapping." "Manning another breach?" Thomas guessed. She nodded slowly. "They've lost control of the legal avenue. Now they're hunting for new angles, maybe new targets."
Later that day, a team from the EPA found something strange during the third excavation phase near the southern boundary line, an area we hadn't touched yet. It wasn't a barrel. It was a vault. 6 feet deep, encased in lead. It took 6 hours to remove, another 10 to pry open with proper tools and radiation-safe gear. Inside was a briefcase, unlabeled. Inside the briefcase, a leather-bound file folder, a hard drive, and a small object wrapped in cloth. The file contained foreign patents, maps written in Cyrillic, and logs that dated back to the late 80s. The hard drive? Encrypted beyond anything Kessler had seen. And the object in the cloth? A simple copper tag inscribed in Old English, quote, "Property of Lazarus Division," unquote. No one in the room spoke for a full minute. Kessler was the one who broke the silence. "That's not a company," he said. "That's a shadow division." "Of Cerberus?" I asked. "Of something older." Elaine leaned forward. "How old?" Kessler looked at her, then me. "There are rumors, projects left behind when intelligence agencies were reorganized, shells that housed covert tech ops, psych warfare testing, early satellite masking. Lazarus Division was allegedly one of them. But they were shut down," Odessa added. "On paper," he said. That night, I didn't sleep. Again. Not out of fear this time, out of weight. The land hadn't just been poisoned. It had been used. Hidden things that reached beyond greed, beyond family. My father had known. That's why he buried the vaults so deep. That's why he never told me. But secrets rot when kept underground. The hard drive was eventually cracked, after Kessler handed it to a specialized forensic unit in D.C. What they found shifted the narrative of the entire investigation. Blueprints for signal jammers, experimental cloaking tech that used natural mineral interference, log files referencing drones launched during global conflicts with routes traced through North America, and coordinates. Dozens of them, each linked to private lands bought by shell companies, many now exposed as Cerberus holdings. But Rowan Hill wasn't just on the list. It was the first entry. Rowan was the pilot site. They tested signal manipulation here. Your father's mineral surveys were just the icing. They needed this topography, the resonance, the distance from population hubs. I sat in my barn that night staring at the beams above my head. I remember being 6, drawing constellations on the rafters with chalk while my dad worked the tools below. I remember how he used to tap the wood with his knuckles, listening for hollows. He wasn't checking for rot. He was checking for ears. Thomas joined me after midnight. He didn't say anything at first, just handed me a mug of hot cider and sat beside me on the hay bale. "You regret staying?" he asked. "No," I said. He nodded. "Me neither." We sat a long time in the quiet. Then I said something I hadn't even realized I believed until the words left my mouth. "I don't think this is about Rowan Hill anymore." He looked at me. "Then what's it about?" I looked out the barn window where the fog was starting to rise. Truth. And who gets to bury it? The next day, we held a summit, not just with the feds, but with other landowners whose properties had appeared in the vault's coordinates. Some came in person, others joined by secure call. One by one, they told similar stories. Threats, legal manipulation, disappearing family members, unexplained drone sightings, tampered deeds. Elaine helped organize a coalition. Kessler backed it with agency support. We called it the Ground Line Initiative. Our mission was simple: expose land-based surveillance shells disguised as private corporate assets. It started small, 12 properties, then 20, then 63, then headlines, then hearings, but none of that mattered as much as the moment I stood in my orchard again, long after dusk, and saw children laughing under the trees. The trust had opened for its first educational program. 10 kids, city-born, boots too clean, eyes wide with wonder as Thomas showed them how to read soil color like a story. I stood beside Meredith, arms folded, watching. "They'll never know how close we came," she said quietly. "No," I said. "But they'll know who stood in the way." She smiled. "You did more than stand." I looked out across the land. I remembered. That night, I opened my father's last journal, the one he wrote after Mom died. And on the inside back cover, scribbled in pencil, a single sentence. "A deed is more than paper. It's memory made permanent." I closed the journal, then turned off the light, and slept, for the first time, deeply.
The next storm came without thunder. It didn't roll in with sirens or headlines. It came by email. A message from a burner account with no name, no subject. Just a link. Elaine flagged it. Kessler traced it. Odessa scanned it. Then she gave me a nod. "You should see this." I clicked it open. A video. Grainy. Time-stamped 4 months ago. A camera angle from high in the trees, thermal lens. Clearly not domestic. It showed me, in the orchard, walking, alone. Another clip. Me in the barn, talking to Thomas. Another. My bedroom window, curtains drawn, but heat signatures pulsing across the screen like I was the last warm body on Earth. The file name was simple. Priority Echo 1. Elaine closed her laptop and looked at me. They didn't just want the land, they wanted you. Kessler paced. Odessa stayed still. "This was human intel," she said, "not automated. Someone was watching manually, which means there's a handler out there. A living thread." It made sense. Unsettling. Perfect sense. The escalation, the timing, the messages. Cerberus hadn't given up. They'd just gone dark. And in going dark, they'd adapted. The investigation might have exposed their networks, but not their instincts. Ghosts don't die. They vanish, regroup, and study. Odessa spent the next 3 days in the loft of the barn with infrared goggles, watching. On the third night, she found a trail. Barely visible. Fresh tracks in the frost near the east ridge. Not boots, not heavy, light, precise, the kind that don't crunch leaves. We followed them at dawn. She, me, and Thomas. The trail led down the old hunter's path, long overgrown, down to the southern boundary, where the fence had been rebuilt after the toxic waste excavation. The trail stopped at a tree, a fresh carving in the bark. R6/C1/dusk. Coordinates? A signal? A trap? Odessa took a photo. It's a grid tag, military style. R for region, C for cell. It means something is happening here, tonight. Elaine Kessler set up a remote watch station outside the fence line. They didn't want me involved directly. I insisted. Rowan Hill was mine. I wasn't leaving again. At dusk, we waited. Cold wrapped the land in silence. Even the birds kept their distance. Then from the tree line, 3 figures. Dressed in civilian clothes, no weapons drawn, but something in their posture, straight-backed, trained, made it clear. These weren't tourists. They stopped just inside the property line. Then one stepped forward. A man, older, salt in his beard, calm eyes. He held up a black box and set it on the ground. It blinked once, then projected a holographic message into the cold air. A face. I didn't recognize him, but Elaine did. Her breath caught. She said, "Gabriel Mercer, former DARPA, presumed dead." The hologram spoke. "To Callister Rowan, if you're seeing this,
then Cerberus failed. That alone makes you rare. You've disrupted a program long in motion, one born decades ago in basements no one speaks of. Lazarus Division was only one face. There are others, faces that shift. You weren't supposed to matter, but you persisted. And now you hold not just a deed, but a fulcrum, a pivot point in a chain far larger than Rowan Hill. They will come again, not as Cerberus, not as the third ledger, but as something else. Watch the ground. It always moves first. Signed, G. Mercer. The projection died. The men left. They didn't take the device. They didn't speak. Odessa waited until they vanished, then retrieved the box. It was empty. Kessler called in a full report. But Mercer? No one could confirm he was alive. No digital trail, no financials, no proof. He was a phantom. But his warning was clear. This wasn't over, and I was no longer the center of a personal story. I was the keystone of a larger one. The following week, I stood in front of a full auditorium at the State University. I was asked to speak about land rights, about truth, about what it means to hold ground others want to erase. I wore boots still caked in orchard mud. I read my father's line aloud. A deed is memory made permanent. And then I said something I hadn't planned. We win when we remember, when we root down instead of running, when we outlast the noise. This land didn't save me. I saved it. And in doing so, I saved myself. There was silence. Then applause. But I wasn't listening for claps. I was listening for the next silence, the one that always comes before a shift. Because I knew what Mercer meant. The ground moves first, and Rowan Hill had just started to hum.
By the time the first frost hardened the fields, Rowan Hill was no longer just land. It had become signal. A place where noise cracked apart, where false faces lost their masks, where people came not because they believed in me, but because they believed in what I refused to surrender. And that power, that hum Mercer had warned about, was no longer theoretical. It became real the day the ground moved, literally. It started in the orchard, a low vibration, so subtle I thought I imagined it. A tremor that passed beneath my boots like an old memory shaking loose. Then the barn tools rattled, the fields shuddered, and the well sensor went dead. No earthquake registered, no storm, no explanation. Odessa and Kessler arrived within an hour. They ran tests, scanned the sublayers, and returned with one word: anomaly. Like seismic, I asked? Kessler shook his head. No, not natural, not like anything we've recorded in this region. Odessa pulled up a 3D topographic scan. Beneath Rowan Hill, in the deeper bedrock, a cavity, roughly 30 meters long, 10 wide. It wasn't here 6 months ago, she said. We would have seen it during the EPA surveys. Could it be collapse? No, it's symmetrical, engineered. Thomas stood behind us, arms crossed. A bunker? Odessa zoomed in. Or a chamber. Elaine arrived the next morning with a court liaison. We filed for emergency oversight clearance with the Department of Environmental Control. Within 72 hours, we had authorization to drill. We chose a narrow point above the structure, far from the orchard, away from the educational fields. They bored down slowly, watching for gas pockets or sink risks. 78 feet in, they hit metal. Then silence. Then sound. A low-frequency pulse, rhythmic, faint, repeating. We brought in audio engineers. One of them, a woman named Ray, who used to decode black box signals, called it a resonance loop. Whatever's down there is active, not broadcasting, responding.
To what? She didn't know, but Odessa did. It's a listening station. That night, I stood on the porch with her, coffee between us, silence stretching out across the land like frost. I think your father found it, she said. Found what? This chamber, years ago, maybe even before the easement. Maybe it's why they gave him the easement. You think he knew what it was? I think he knew it shouldn't be found. I remembered his voice in that final video. I left you proof of what they buried and who helped them. Maybe the ledger was only part of it. The next day, we whitened the shaft and lowered a drone. The chamber wasn't just engineered, it was built. Smooth walls, no rust, reinforced with a polymer metal hybrid no one could identify. Markings etched into the corners, symbols that didn't belong to any known language. Inside, a single pedestal. Atop it, a cube. Black, matte, seamless. It's a memory vault, Ray whispered. Signal-based, like a cold drive. Kessler didn't want to touch it. He said, let it stay dormant until we understand more. But the moment the drone approached, the cube pulsed. 3 beats. Then silence. Ray froze. It responded, she said. To what? To the drone. Or to us. Elaine pulled me aside that night. You know we're off map now, right? She said. There's no precedent for this. No protocol. If this gets out, the property becomes federalized, seized. You'll lose everything again. I looked her in the eyes. What if I don't let it get out? You'd be sitting on something the world wants to bury or weaponize, and neither side plays fair. Odessa had her own opinion. Control the narrative. Don't let them define the terms. We say what it is, we say what it means, they react to us. So we held a meeting. All of us, Thomas, Meredith, Ray, Odessa, Kessler, Elaine, inside the barn with blueprints taped across the walls and satellite images spread across the table. We had 2 choices. Either declare the anomaly, let the government classify the land, lose ownership, maybe permanently, or isolate it, build a containment policy, set legal precedent for private anomaly guardianship under trust law. It had never been done. But then again, nothing about this story had followed a path. We filed. 3 weeks of negotiations, hearings, legal gymnastics. And in the end, they agreed. Rowan Hill was declared a protected civilian containment site under state jurisdiction overseen by the Rowan Trust with federal liaison presence. We kept the land, but we accepted responsibility. Kessler called it a miracle. Elaine called it madness, but I knew what it was. A line drawn. The ground moved again that night. Not a quake, a hum, like something turning over in its sleep. And I dreamed of my father. He stood at the ridge, arms folded, staring into the valley like he always had. When I walked up beside him, he didn't turn, just said, "Some things don't want to be found, Callie, but they remember who tried." When I woke, the cube had changed. It pulsed once every hour now, and the pedestal had opened, just slightly. Inside, a single object. A key. Not to a door, but maybe to a truth bigger than anything I had imagined. And Rowan Hill, the land they all tried to erase, was holding it in trust with me.
It didn't feel like triumph. The sphere hovered in the chamber, pulsing steadily, a soft beacon in the dark. But for all its beauty and mystery, no one cheered, no one smiled. Because we all knew what this meant. Whatever Rowan Hill had been, inheritance, battleground, anomaly, it had now become something far more volatile. A signal tower, a map node, and we had just lit the first flare. Ray spent 3 straight days decoding the matrix. Kessler stayed up with her, logging every blink, every shift in the sphere's light pattern. Odessa set up a rotating perimeter guard. Thomas, for once, didn't argue. And me? I stayed at the edge of the orchard, watching, waiting, trying to make peace with the truth that had stalked me for weeks. My father wasn't a victim. He wasn't some poor farmer caught in a bureaucratic trap. He was part of something ancient, intentional, and whatever it was, he had tried to protect it with every breath he had left. On the fourth day, Ray finally cracked part of the sphere's interface. "It's not just a map," she said, eyes wide and bloodshot. "It's a ledger, a living one. These nodes, they're logs of activity, energy shifts, topographic variances, and one more thing." She paused. "They each have timestamps." Odessa leaned in. "From when?" "All different. But ours? Ours started recording again the second the key was activated." Elaine sat beside me on the porch when Ray confirmed it. "You've restarted a mechanism," she said. "God only knows what it's connected to." I looked at her. "You think it's dangerous?" Elaine didn't answer, not directly. "Callie, you've crossed a line," she said slowly. "We're no longer dealing with relics or conspiracies. We're dealing with systems, active systems, with protocols. And if someone built these," I asked, "they'll come back. Or they'll send someone to shut it down before that happens." The next disturbance wasn't seismic. It was coded. A silent burst in the night, a data pulse. Ray picked it up just after midnight, a narrowband signal riding on a low frequency. It originated from the chamber, but it wasn't local. It was a response. A signal had gone out, and something had answered. "East Asia," Ray said, eyes locked on the coordinates. "Somewhere near the Taklamakan Desert, and one more from northern Algeria. They answered us." Odessa paled. "Then the network's alive." It was Kessler who asked the next question, the one we were all afraid of. Did we just wake something up? We didn't know. But that morning, I found a package on my doorstep. No return address, no stamp, just my name in careful handwriting. Inside, a cassette tape and a note. "Play only once, destroy after." The player we used belonged to my father, still sitting dusty in the barnside office. When I pressed play, a voice came through, grainy, familiar. "Mercer. I told you there were others. Some are dead, some are hiding. But one, Kelly? One is here, watching. Closer than you think. They'll try to convince you they're harmless. They'll offer help, and when they do, you need to ask one thing. What does the key open? If they answer, they're lying, because no one knows. Not even me. Then static. Then silence. I didn't destroy the tape. I hid it. Because something in Mercer's voice shook me. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid for me. That night, I called a meeting. Everyone sat around the long table in the barn's main hall. I looked each of them in the eye. "I want to move the sphere," I said. Ray almost dropped her cup. "Move it, Callie? It's bonded to the pedestal. It's not just sitting there, it's integrated. We take it out, we risk corrupting the entire system. But if we leave it," I said, "we invite attack, theft, manipulation." Elaine nodded slowly. "We need a failsafe." Thomas leaned forward. "We dig another chamber. Our own. Bury it. Lock it. Only we know where." Odessa approved. So did Ray. And by the end of the week, a second site had been built beneath the orchard's northern ridge. Reinforced. Shielded. Independent. The sphere was relocated during a 20-minute blackout, staged under the guise of equipment maintenance. Only 6 people knew the location. Only I held the secondary access key. It bought us quiet. For a while. But quiet is not peace. The believers came back, this time in larger numbers. They brought signs, chants, drones. One even tried to tunnel under the fence.
We turned them away again and again, but the story had left our hands. It was global now. The UK Guardian published a piece titled, "The Woman and the Hill That Listens." CNN ran a segment, "Mystery Network Beneath American Soil." And then the governments called. First state, then federal, then international, each demanding access, transparency, control. We gave none. Elaine stood firm. Odessa threatened to leak everything if they pushed. And me? I stood in the center of Rowan Hill and listened to the hum of the sphere beneath my boots. It was steady now, like breath, like a heartbeat, like waiting.
The air above Rowan Hill had changed. Not the weather, not the scent of cold earth or late autumn frost. Something deeper, heavier, like waiting, like breath held in the dark. And I felt it before anyone else did. The pressure, like something was inching closer every day, crossing a boundary we hadn't known existed until the key turned. The first sign was the interference. Not static, not noise. A pattern. Ray caught it on the ground sensors, repeating pulses of radiation, precisely timed, spaced apart by 11 minutes and 16 seconds. It didn't match any known satellite orbit. Then came the tremors, subsurface, shallow, rhythmic. Odessa thought they were tests, someone probing for the chamber. But when we mapped the quake patterns across the property line, they formed a shape, a spiral, moving inward, toward the orchard, toward the sphere. Elaine called an emergency meeting. We met in the silo office, low lighting, no tech, no signals. "This isn't random," Ray said, laying the pattern across a grainy topographic map. "Someone's signaling us, and whatever's responding, it's doing so through the earth." "It's pressure," Odessa added. "Not just physical, magnetic, electrochemical, like it's testing the boundaries of the vault." "And if it finds them?" I asked. "We won't be the ones who open the next door." It wasn't long before the land responded. A crack appeared in the orchard soil, thin, jagged, running like a vein toward the North Ridge. Kessler took samples. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "It's not just soil anymore. There's synthetic material here, polymer, like something's been injected underground." The next night, Mercer returned. Not in person, but in film. A security alert in the barn triggered an archived feed from 24 years ago, footage never logged, never time-stamped, stored in a corrupted folder Ray only accessed by accident. In the video, Mercer, my father, and a third man, bald, tall, face hidden in profile. They stood in the original chamber. The cube was there. So was the key. They were arguing. "Not yet," my father was saying. "We don't know what it responds to." "We don't need to know," Mercer said. "We just need to secure it." The third man, voice flat, clinical, "You misunderstand. This was never about securing. It was about observing." Then silence. The feed cut. And we were left with more questions than answers. Elaine ran the voice sample against public records. Nothing. Ray ran it through a Black Lab AI model. Match probability, 76%. Name, Dr. Elias Corin. Affiliation, unknown. Last seen, 1993. Status, deceased. The pressure on the hill kept building. By November, our days blurred into watch shifts and encrypted meetings. Even Meredith returned, silent, gaunt, but willing. "They're circling," she said one morning, watching black SUVs pass slowly on the county road. "Who?" "Everyone who wants what's buried, everyone who thinks it belongs to them." She didn't speak after that, but she stayed. Even Thomas stopped mocking the prep drills. We knew something was coming, but we didn't know what. Then the weather changed. Fast, violent. A windstorm hit the valley. No warning. Trees bent at angles I'd never seen. Power lines went dead. And through it all, the orchard glowed. Not visibly. Electromagnetically. Ray's instruments picked up the spike at 2:14 a.m. A vertical beam. Invisible.
targeted, directed somewhere. Odessa dropped a Faraday cage around the chamber, but the sphere kept pulsing. And when I approached it the next morning, something had changed. A second sphere had appeared, smaller, spinning beside the first, almost like replication or duplication. No, I said, staring at it. It's a response. That day, I received a letter. Not an email, not a courier drop. Handwritten. Signed, Elias Corin. 3 words inside. Meet me alone. Coordinates. Just beyond the old quarry. Thomas nearly broke a window when I told him I was going. You're walking into a trap, he said. You don't know this man. You don't know what he wants. No, I said, but he knows what my father wanted. And that's more than anyone else here can give me. Elaine tried to come, Odessa too, but I went alone. The quarry was empty, silent. Then I saw him, Dr. Elias Corin. Older now, thin, but his eyes burned with the same certainty I'd seen in the footage. You look like your father, he said. You knew him? I trained him. In what? He didn't smile. In containment. We walked the rim of the quarry in silence. Then he stopped, looked me dead in the eyes. You activated the node. I didn't deny it. What does it want? It doesn't want. It records. It remembers. And when enough of them wake, they begin to reconstruct. Reconstruct what? The original framework. For what? He held up a stone, just a piece of shale. Consciousness, he said. Not human, not sentient in the way we understand, but aware, collective, and ancient. I stared. You're saying we're building an intelligence? No, you're waking one up. He handed me a flash drive. Your father tried to delay the chain. He failed. You accelerated it. And now? Corin looked toward the hill. Now the others will come, and not all of them are friendly. That night, Ray decrypted the flash drive. It contained logs, footage, maps, and a message buried in layers of code. When the echoes align, the door will open. Odessa drew a breath. The echoes? The pulses we've been getting? They're alignment signals, Ray whispered. When enough nodes pulse at the same frequency, Elaine finished it for her. Something opens. I looked at the orchard, at the ridge, at the quiet heartbeat under my feet. And I knew, whatever was coming, it had already begun. And Rowan Hill would be the first place it stepped through.
The morning after the echoes aligned, the wind died. Not slowed, not calmed. It simply stopped, as if the sky held its breath. And in the silence, I felt it again, that pressure. But this time, it wasn't distant. It wasn't an omen. It was here. The orchard shimmered at dawn, not visibly, but in instruments, in readings, and the very air. Ray's equipment showed seismic micro-vibrations. Odessa's BM sensors blinked out, overwhelmed by signal noise. And I, standing at the threshold of the orchard, felt my skin hum. The second sphere had grown overnight, doubling in diameter, orbiting the first like a moon, each movement deliberate, synchronized. It's not growth, Ray said. It's synchronization. With what? She hesitated. With whatever answered us. We didn't need more theories. We needed proof, action. So, we took a risk. We entered the orchard's perimeter. Me, Ray, Odessa, and Kessler. Inside, the pressure grew. The soil beneath our boots crackled like glass beneath tension. Lights flickered, sensors failed, but the spheres held steady. And then,
At the orchard's center, something new, a third sphere. Not metal, not glass, it was translucent, like crystal laced with fire. And inside it, hovering, weightless, was my father's signet ring, the one buried with him. Odessa reached for it. The moment her hand broke the field, she screamed. Not in pain, in shock. She collapsed. We pulled her out, Ray stabilizing her vitals. When she woke, she whispered, "Memories. Not mine. His." She looked at me. Your father's last thoughts, trapped inside the node. His intentions, encoded. Back in the silo, Odessa began transcribing what she saw. Words spilled from her like dictation. Containment failed. Cabe lied. Corin warned us. The framework was never inert. It was waiting for the right mind. Someone it could align with. Someone who believed enough to awaken it. It was always you. I sat back, breath gone. My chest ached with the weight of it. All this time, I thought I was fighting to protect my father's land, his secrets, his legacy. But it wasn't about inheritance. It was about succession. The black SUVs returned at sunset. Not parked, this time. Advancing. Armed. Elaine triggered the perimeter alarms. Thomas took position at the gate. Meredith locked down the barn vaults. A private contractor convoy. No insignia, no badges. But we knew. They worked for Cade. Or what was left of him. Because when the lead truck opened, Lennox Cade Jr. stepped out, flanked by two pale men in sterile suits. He held up a document. By order of provisional writ, this property is now under protective seizure. Elaine stepped forward. You have no authority. He said, we have precedent. No court order, no warrant. You're trespassing. He smiled. Then stop us. The men moved forward. Ray activated the EMP net. The first wave of their electronics shorted out instantly. But the men kept walking because they weren't fully human. Odessa gasped. Clones. No. Simulacra. Replicas grown with partial consciousness. Biological drones. And they weren't after the land. They were after me. Chaos erupted. Elaine shouted for cover. Thomas opened fire, but bullets only slowed them. Ray scrambled to reroute power. Meredith tossed a flare that ignited their supply truck. I ran, straight for the orchard, because I knew if I didn't make it to the sphere, they'd win. Inside the orchard, the field pulsed. A hum in my blood, a rhythm in my bones. The crystal sphere opened, like it recognized me. I stepped inside. And then, silence. The world vanished. No sound, no breath, only light. And voices. Thousands of them. Echoes. I saw visions, not memories, not dreams. It was possibilities. Whole worlds rising and falling. Machinery growing like coral. Minds blooming like constellations. And then, my father's face. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The truth poured into me like fire. The framework was never a weapon. It was a filter, a gatekeeper. It was testing humanity, testing me. For what? For resonance. The ability to carry its signal, to be its conduit, to awaken what slept beneath the layers of our world. I understood then. Rowan Hill was never mine to defend. It was mine to connect, to activate, to bridge. I opened my eyes. Outside, the orchard pulsed with new energy. The clones stopped, frozen. Cade Jr. fell to his knees, not from pain, from submission. The field had shifted, and I was now its center, the first aligned. Ray's voice echoed in my earpiece. Callie, you're glowing. I stepped from the crystal. The nodes pulsed in response. 3 spheres, aligned. But I knew we were still only at the beginning. Corin's warning rang in my head. When the echoes align, the door will open. The door hadn't opened yet, but now it was turning.
and what lay beyond it was waking.
The light didn't fade. Even hours after the alignment, the orchard pulsed with low, silent illumination. Not enough to blind, but enough to remind us that the spheres were no longer dormant. They were active, linked, and I was the link. Ray spent the rest of the night scanning me, not out of fear, but necessity. The alignment had changed my biometrics. Pulse, blood composition, neural frequency. I wasn't infected. I wasn't sick. I was upgraded. We're seeing harmonics in your brain that don't register on human charts, she said, eyes wide behind the glow of her laptop. It's not just resonance, Callie. You're broadcasting. To who? She didn't answer, because we both knew the better question was, to what? Odessa suggested isolation. Elaine countered that it was too late for that. Meredith ran a secondary lockdown on the barn, reinforcing the vaults. And Thomas just stood beside me, one hand always on his rifle, the other twitching like he wanted to hold my hand, but didn't know if I was still the woman he'd once trusted. Neither did I. The next signal came 3 days later, a burst of microwave radiation, not from orbit, not from satellites, from underground, deep, older than our instruments could map. It resonated with the spheres, causing them to momentarily sink, then pause, as if listening. Then a sound, a voice, not in English, not in language, in meaning. It bypassed ears, entered the mind like memory. Seedling recognized, phase shift enabled. Ray collapsed. Odessa staggered. I fell to my knees. Elaine pulled us all back into the silo, locking the orchard behind steel. We barely had time to recover when Corin arrived. He didn't knock. He simply walked in, holding a white cloth over his head. He told you, he said, this place was a relay, a cradle. And now it's begun. What is it? I asked. Corin looked at me the way someone might regard a match being struck inside a forest. A return. He brought blueprints, maps I'd never seen, older than Rowan Hill's foundation. This land sits at a convergence, not just geologic, not just energetic, temporal. You're saying time's distorted here? Ray asked, still pale. I'm saying time flows through here, which means when the spheres aligned, they didn't just send a signal forward, they sent it backward. To when? Corin pointed at the map, at a buried strata no one had ever excavated. To before us. He traced a circle. Whatever is answering us now was already here, waiting, beneath. And now it's waking. The dreams began that night. All of us, shared. Impossible. Each dream began the same way. Standing in a field of silver trees, the sky, amber, crackling with static, a structure ahead, a spire, breathing. At its base, a doorway. And behind it, we could never remember. Ray tried dream recording. Odessa tried sedatives. Meredith prayed. Thomas didn't sleep at all. And me? I let the dreams come. Because deep in the dream, I felt calm, not fear, not confusion, recognition. As if some part of me had always known this place existed, that it was calling me home. 4 days later, a rift opened. In the orchard. Not a crack, not a quake, a spatial fold. The grass rippled like water. A vertical seam split the air, 3 feet wide, glowing blue at the edges. Thomas aimed at it. Ray scanned it. Odessa ran. But I walked forward. Because I knew. It wasn't an invasion. It was an invitation. I reached for the seam. It took me. No pain.
just motion, like stepping through a waterfall of light. I opened my eyes inside the spire, the one from the dreams. It was real. Polished stone walls, floating glyphs, a ceiling that spun like a galaxy. And ahead, on a raised platform, another sphere. Black. Dormant. I stepped forward, and it pulsed. Not once. 3 times. Then my father's voice. Callie, if you're hearing this, the chain completed. This is a pre-recorded neural echo, a failsafe. I never wanted you pulled into this, but if the node accepted you, it means you carry the alignment factor. You're not a user, you're a key. He paused. They'll tell you to shut it down, to run, to bury it again, but you can't. Not now. It's too late. A tremor. Dust fell from the spire ceiling, and then his final words. Finish what I couldn't. Complete the bridge. And whatever you do, don't let Cade control the fourth. The rift pulled me back at sunrise. I stumbled into Odessa's arms, eyes wide, mind burning. Cade's after a fourth node, I said. Korn stepped out of the shadows. He found one. In the Alps, but it's sealed. Then we need to get there first. Ray was already booking satellite time. Elaine was calling in old allies. Meredith packed the vault. And me? I stood at the orchard's edge one last time, because I knew the hill that birthed this legacy could no longer hold it. This wasn't just my land anymore. It was the center of something vast, living, awake, and we were running out of time.
The journey to the Alps was not covert. It couldn't be. Not when every agency, private contractor, and shadow-funded think tank wanted the same thing. Access, alignment, control. We flew under aliases, crossed through 4 countries in silence. Ray handled the tech, Odessa plotted the coordinates, Corin guided us from memory alone. But it was me they followed. Me the framework had marked. The node at Rowan Hill had shifted something permanent in me. I didn't just feel the energy now, I anticipated it. I could sense pulse frequencies hours before our scanners picked them up. By the time we reached the ridge above the Swiss crater where the 4th node supposedly slept, the snow had turned black with ash. A burn zone. Signs of recent excavation. And signs we were already too late. Cade's people were here. We spotted the dig site from a ridge. Tents, drones, infrared barriers, a dome of glass at the crater's center over a hole drilled so deep the thermal readouts distorted. Inside that hole,